Right then, hello everybody. All of a sudden, somebody just said, "Is this been a webinar week?" And I said, "I think it is." We're after kind of doing PMO Learning and the conference last week, just kind of doing this whole I think this is the third webinar this week we've done, but I thought it would be really good just to take the opportunity to introduce. Who's still there as Lindsay Scott, but it really is Roy Millard in terms of the.
Oh, I've managed to change your name, Eileen.
Changed me. Right then, so
I don't know how I've done
I'll
that.
change myself back to my name just to solve any confusion. You'll see that I've shared some slides so you can actually kind of see who's meant to be who. There we go, we've got our names right now. So I thought it would be really good because Roy's just joining the delivery team of PMO Learn specifically to deliver the Assurance for PMO Professionals course. So I thought rather than just kind of do the normal thing where we would just kind of take you through the course information, it would also be quite nice just to know a little bit more about Roy. So welcome to the team, Roy. You recovered from the conference last week because you did 2 conferences in a day, didn't you?
I did, yes. One in London, one in Manchester. So yes, it was a shoot off from the PMO one up to Manchester to help deliver the one up there. But yes, a good day.
Well, I think it just shows where we are in terms of the whole kind of question around assurance. Certainly at PMO Learning, we found there's an awful lot of interest. You know, we put the course up there and we advertised it at the conference, at the PMO conference last week, and we've had a kind of a huge amount of interest in what the course is about. So I just thought we would, as I say, talk through a little bit about you and the course and what it offers. We've got this as a webinar, but as if you're sitting there in the audience and listening to this, you'll see that we've got chat open. So chat is available for you to talk to everybody. So I'm going to be asking kind of questions of Roy as we go through the next probably 30 to 40 minutes. If you've got any other questions that you want to ask to Roy, feel free to put them in the chat and we can kind of weave those in as we go through the webinar today. So Roy, assurance is obviously your specialist subject, looking at your kind of LinkedIn profile. How did that happen?
Well, by accident, I think is the short answer, really. But I think it all started really when I went to. I trained originally as an engineer and a project manager, and I did that for about half of my career. And around about the turn of the century, I joined Transport for London, just about 2001, I think it was 2002, to set up an internal audit capability to review TfL's projects and programs. Transport London, big organisation, for those of you who might not know, they were spending several billion every year on capital projects. A very new organisation, really didn't have anything in place in terms of trying to provide any assurance over all of that. And the then head of internal audit was a very progressive lady, and she wanted somebody to run all that work who came from a delivery background. And certainly one of my strong beliefs in assurance is to be an effective assurer, particularly if you're doing a review or an audit, you really have to have an insight into the type of risks associated with the thing you're providing the assurance over. So that was very consistent with me being appointed to do that job. For me, I thought it was the first time I'd been really getting involved in any assurance. I soon realised, though, that, of course, as an engineer and a project manager, I've been involved in assurance ever since I started work. I just didn't think of it in quite that way. As an engineer, a young engineer, I was having to follow all sorts of technical assurance procedures, quality assurance procedures. Some of our customers, like MOD, had procedures we had to follow, standard we had to follow. So it's always been a feature of my life as a professional. And it was in those sort of first few years when I was at Transport for London that I realised just how big a topic actually assurance is. Also around that time, Crossrail was starting to get going. The Olympics was starting to get going all over those first few years. And one of the challenges that a lot of these big projects and programs were coming up with is how do they manage all of the assurance work? Because so many people wanted to assure them, and a project like the Olympics had hundreds of people all wanting to have assurance over the way in which the Olympics was being delivered. And so there was a lot of discussion going on that I was a part of, about how do you organise all of that. And that's when this idea of integrated assurance came along, which is something which actually does feature within the training course. But it was very clear that there was very little around in terms of how to do it, how to do assurance, how to do it integrated assurance. So my professional body was the Association for Project Management, and I was getting more and more involved with them. And I proposed to them that we start a specific interest group on this particular topic, on assurance. That was launched officially in 2008, and I ran it pretty much ever since. I left Transport for London in the end of 2017. I'd only intended to go into that role for a few years and then go back into a delivery one. However, I was in it for 15 years at Transport for London, because it was never a dull moment, really. It was always, it's a really interesting place to be, really interesting aspect of project management to be involved in. And I left in 2017. I've been working as an independent in this topic of assurance. Assurance is very related to governance, very related to risk management. So I sort of get involved in those areas as well. So that's really how. It certainly wasn't planned, but I found it was something that suited me. I enjoyed it. I seemed to be quite good at it, so I pursued it.
So you've talked about this huge big subject that assurance is. So if I asked you to explain assurance in a single sentence, how would you explain it?
The simple way really is really anything that exists or is done to provide and hopefully improve confidence of successful delivery. So in the context of projects, it's all about assuring or providing confidence and increasing confidence of successful project delivery, whatever that means. And of course, we don't want to get into a debate about what we mean by successful delivery in a project, but that's essentially in a nutshell what it's all about. So
if I give you a few more words, and we have said, kind of, if you could kind of cover off, well, what kind of thing does assurance cover off? So we've potentially got people in the audience who are kind of working in and around projects and programs, maybe sitting in a PMO thinking, well, I wonder if I've done some assurance and just not known about it. So which is, kind of where you said you were. So what kind of things might people have been involved in without necessarily knowing it was assurance?
I think it's very likely. If you think about assurance as being something that you need to have when you have risk, and underlying all assurance activity is risk. So there's an awful lot of things that happen in projects, and to an extent, one of the reasons you have project managers is because there's risk in projects. If there was no risk, no uncertainty, you would just set something up to happen, and it would just happen. But of course, that's not life. It doesn't happen because of risk. So you have to have project management and standards and procedures and people and roles and all that sort of stuff, because things can go wrong. And things can go wrong. Risks exist at every sort of level, really sort of low down and a technical engineering type of level, right through to procurement risk and contract risk, legal risk. Those of you, I find it very hard to believe that many people on this call, if they're involved in PMOs, they won't have had some involvement in risk in some way, even if it's just sort of reporting risk. And so assurance really is tailored to providing confidence around the management of those risks, ensuring the right risks are identified, that they're recorded, they're managed, and that they're dealt with appropriately in the context of successful delivery. So if you're doing a role in a PMO, you're doing that role because there's something around the project that you're involved in that could go wrong if you weren't doing that role. So you're by definition, you are involved in assurance, even though you may not necessarily realise it.
So let me just clarify my understanding of this, Roy, in terms of, but it's more than just kind of the risk management process, isn't it? It's kind of saying, what do we have to put in place to kind of cover off projects going wrong? So that can include like a project delivery method?
Indeed. So there's one way of, without going into other detail here, some of the people on the call may have heard of the 3 lines of defence model, which is a really good way of describing what assurance is all about. And very briefly, for those of you who may not be aware of it as a model, what it talks about is that whenever an organisation does something as an endeavour, like a project, there is risk associated with that. So you have an organisation put into place as a part of its overall assurance arrangements, first line of defence, or first line of assurance, or whatever you want to call it. And they are things like project management methodologies, they are standards, procedures, systems, things that management in an organisation put in place to make people do things in a particular way. Then you have second line assurance, which is people like quality assurance, the sort of functional departments you get in organisations around risk management, finance, security, health and safety, quality assurance. They don't actually get involved in the day-to-day delivery of projects, but they're there to ensure that things are done in a particular way, that the project is supported in a way that manages risks. And they are very often responsible for the design and implementation of all those first level controls. And then they provide oversight to ensure that they're still working and that people are actually following them. And then you get third line of assurance, third line of defence, which is things like internal audit, external audit, those sort of, they're organisations that are completely independent from the delivery of a project, but they report into the board, the audit committee, government, or wherever, and it's characterised by that sort of independence.
And that's because they're given the confidence kind of outside and upwards on the project.
That's right, and they cover. That third line covers everything. It covers the operation of the second line of defence. It covers the operation of the first line of defence, and it also covers the processes for identifying and understanding what the risks are. So that whole system of in the internal audit world, they talk about an overall system of risk and control. And internal audit there is provide confidence over the overall risk and control. So an internal audit covers the whole of an organisation's activities, not just projects. But in the context of a project, it's about control over projects. Okay,
which is interesting then, because I think even just kind of going through that kind of explanation, which to be fair, I've never heard it described so succinctly, so that was really helpful in terms of actually then starting to recognise what the role of the PMO might be in assurance in individuals' organisations.
It's a complex question, or rather the answer is complex for 2 reasons. One, because PMOs can mean so many different things to different people. I'm sure you all know. We've had this conversation before. So the role that a PMO in one organisation could have from an assurance point of view could be quite different to one in a different organisation. And also because assurance is such a broad topic. So a PMO could never overall own everything to do with assurance in an organisation because it doesn't have enough independence. There'll always be parts of an assurance regime in an organisation that requires more independence than a PMO, wherever it's cited, could ever provide. So it can never be wholly responsible, but it could have a number of different roles. I have to say, when you and I first started talking, Eileen, about assurance and PMOs, I was deeply sceptical about PMOs having a role in assurance. That was largely dependent actually on the experience of PMOs that I'd had, which was they were very transient, pretty disorganized, and very political, and very much under the thumb of people who are responsible, senior people who are responsible for delivery. I think PMOs have moved on an awful lot away from that. Certainly as a concept, not necessarily in practice in some organisations, but as a concept have moved away a lot from that. So I think there's a much more potential for assurance to be a home for assurance, for PMOs to be a home for assurance. The other thing is assurance does need a home. It does need somebody in an organisation. It does need somewhere for there to be a repository of knowledge, expertise, advice, a centre of gravity for assurance activity. It can't be within a project. It can't really be within one of the sort of finance functions, for example, because they're part of second line. So where would it go? Now, from a project point of view, I think actually a PMO is potentially a really good place for that centre of gravity to live. In other organisations, when I was at TfL, I tried to get it into internal audit. The trouble is with internal audit, it's full of internal auditors who don't really know anything much about projects. And they're not really particularly interested in projects. And so you're fighting against finance people all the time. And of course, nobody likes internal audit. So if you go and tell the rest of the organisation how they should be doing their assurance, they just send you away.
And of course, they love the PMO.
I don't know, but maybe. So I think I really think there's a real potential for a PMO, for PMOs to have a strong involvement in assurance. There's an obvious one around reviews, and a lot of PMOs get involved in doing reviews of projects. Now that would be in this 3 lines of defence model. It would be a second line review. So you're not responsible. You're one step away from delivery. You're not actually one of the controls, but you're not really independent enough to be a third line. So I think it's a really key role. So I spend in the training, the 2-day training, I spend a lot of time talking about how to do reviews, how to plan, how to execute them, what you do after them, because it's a really key part of it. I don't want to give the impression, though, that reviews is the sum total, and it absolutely isn't. So another thing that PMOs often have in terms of written assurance role is maintaining things like standards and systems. If, for example, there's a reporting system that everybody has to use, I argue that's an assurance mechanism because it makes people report in a particular way. Mm-hmm. And you can provide some sort of independent scrutiny over the way that people are using the reporting tool. That's, for me, an assurance mechanism. So if you think in this broad way, there's actually loads of opportunity for PMOs to be very prominent in assurance. The final point, I think, actually, there's more to say, but the final point I wanted to make around that is organisations need advice, guidance, support on how to do assurance in projects properly and how it should interface with corporate assurance, for example. I think there's a really good potential there for PMOs to provide that sort of advice. So out one step removed from what they're actually doing day to day, but actually advising the department, advising the legal department, advising the finance department, how should it set up assurance arrangements such that they are really robust and joined up and integrated and efficient.
So quite a bit of work for the PMO to do them. And I know the House of PMO, when they did the competency framework, have spent time putting assurance in as a PMO competence. So, kind of that all kind of rounds it. And obviously from a PMO learning perspective, one of the reasons why we got in touch with you, Roy, to kind of to deliver this course for us. So we talk in the in PMO about kind of having different levels of roles from an administrator, analyst, manager, and director. The 2-day course that we've pulled together, where do you think that's kind of best pitched?
It's certainly not at the PMO director level, I don't think. It is, I would say it's certainly PMO administrator, analyst, and manager type level. But then I imagine the PMO manager role could change quite a bit depending on the positioning and size of the PMO. So I would imagine a PMO manager in a large organisation portfolio management office would actually that'd be a fairly senior, quite influential role. I've actually split the training into. It was originally I was thinking in terms of 3 days, so it really is a 3-day scope to be covered. I split it into a 2-day and a 1-day. Really, for the 2-day which we're offering in December. The moment as a first pass is really for the administrator, analyst, and for PMO managers. It's for PMO directors as well as a grounding, but it really doesn't go into the latter bit of what I was talking about, which is how do you advise the organisation on how it should do its arrangements? Because I guess your average administrator and analyst isn't going to get involved in doing that. However, a PMO director, well, absolutely should be doing that sort of thing. And a PMO manager are somewhere in between, depending on the nature of the PMO, I think. So the third day is much more around how do you how do you advise? What does this look like from a corporate point of view? What are the frameworks and things you put in place? How would they work? How would you get those implemented in an organisation in a practical sense? So much wider than just what the PMO would do day to day.
So the 2-day course is we've called it kind of assurance and the PMO. So this is about the kind of the day-to-day assurance activities that individuals will be undertaking in their role. So what specifically is kind of covered off in those 2 days, Roy? Can you tell us a little bit more detail about the subjects that are covered?
Yeah. So day one is really all about what is assurance in its broadest sense. So we talk about the 3 lines of defence model. We talk about all the different types of assurance that exist and the differences between them, the sort of conflicts that you can get between them. Both days are characterised by a lot of delegate involvement, delegate participation, because I think that's I think it's the best way to learn on this thing. And assurance,
we would concur.
Yeah, assurance is a pretty dry subject.
Roy.
I'm the first to admit it. And if you're not talking about real life type examples, it's really hard to sort of get your head around some of this stuff. So I've created an example organisation that is used throughout the course. We keep on dipping back into that real organisation. Well, it's not a real organisation. It's a sort of a synthetic case study. And trying to get the delegates to think in terms of how does this apply? How does this theory apply?
It's really practical.
So it is practical. And one of the significant things about giving guidance on how to do assurance in organisations is there really isn't a vanilla answer. There's certain things like the 3 lines of defence model which you can always apply. There's other tools like assurance mapping you can always apply. But what it would look like in one organisation could be completely different to what it looks like in another one.
Like many of the things that we do.
Yeah. So really what I'm trying to do in the 2-day course is to get people thinking in the right way, recognising what is assurance, how to do it, what the principles are, for example, of good assurance, what is not good assurance. So that when they go away and they're looking in their organisation and their PMO and what they're doing, they can apply that from a practical point of view, rather than just saying, well, you know, the assurance for project managers says you should do this, like a Prince 2 manual says you should do this. Well, assurance doesn't work that way, I don't think.
Okay. It's a bit like when we deliver the P3O course, in that rather than giving you the exam answers and saying we have to design it like this, what it does, it helps you understand what questions need to be asked. And when you understand the answers, you can then design something that's appropriate for the organisation.
Absolutely. And as I said, the second day is very much based upon reviews, because reviews are are key parts of assurance, and is sometimes the most obvious, most not transparent, most visible aspect of assurance in projects, and often have the most impact, more impact than anything else. So they are a very key part, and they're absolutely something which staff in PMOs will get involved in, either because they're part of a project assurance function, or because there's some sort of peer review type arrangement in the organisation, and they will pull people in to do reviews. So I think it's very likely that the PMO people who will be on the course will be involved in that type of work at some point. So we major that on the second day.
Okay, so they get some prize. So really, it's useful for everybody. So in terms of the course, we've got a public course scheduled in December, as you've mentioned. Is there any benefit from running this as kind of in-house in organisations and taking kind of, I hate the term sheep dipping, but actually kind of taking your whole team through this to get a kind of an understanding for your organisation?
Absolutely, because I don't think assurance is very well understood. It's got a lot better understood by people who are, I would describe as assurance professionals, people who do it day to day. But outside of assurance, the assurance profession, which is a phrase I use with some caution because it doesn't really exist at the moment. But outside the assurance profession, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what assurance is. So yes, the more people that can get this introduction, this very broad understanding about what assurance is, the better. So if a group of PMO people really understand that when they go out and have their conversations with their projects and their steering committees and things, then they'll have that, they'll know that, and it will get, some of it will get through by osmosis. The other thing about sort of going in is this point around it will vary from an organisation to one organisation to another. So if you're particularly on the third day where we would be talking about how to do it in your organisation more practically, it's much more powerful if you can start applying it. Well, what do you do? What is the arrangement in this organisation? What are the reporting lines? Where does the PMO fit? Is there an internal audit function? If there's an internal audit function, how good are they at projects? Do they have nothing to do with projects? Yeah, you can start asking these more sort of specific questions and building that into the discussion more than you can on a sort of a classroom-based course. Okay,
so in the public courses, we have a 2-day course. As an in-house course, that extends then to a 3-day course. So we're going to have that real kind of targeted discussion and work with the people from that PMO to look at kind of what that means for their organisation, so they can actually do some work on that with you and get some advice and guidance on how it works for their particular context. Excellent. So that's sounds good. Is there anybody out there in the audience? We've got a few people on the call. Anybody got any kind of specific questions that they want to ask of Roy, whether that be, you can either do that in chat or it's a webinar, so the question and answer sessions are open. Anybody got any questions? So the chat's been very quiet. I suspect that's because we've all been listening, Roy, to the conversation.
No, I've sent them to sleep, Eileen, haven't I?
Oh, absolutely not. Well, do you know what? It's been really interesting because, I've known you for a kind of long time and been around PMOs for even longer, but having a really good kind of succinct definition of what assurance is. And I have to say, I've always used that that link back to confidence, about what can we do to provide confidence. But it's the kind of the 3-line defense, I think, is a great structure that allows us to kind of hook onto what we're doing from a PMO perspective in terms of kind of which element we're kind of setting that up as, but also, as you said, recognizing that there are certain things that will be done around assurance that we can't do because we don't have that independence. And certainly I've been involved in organizations where we may not necessarily have done the assurance, but we may have, as you mentioned, coordinated some assurance activities where we've got external third parties in to undertake some of that assurance. So we have got one question in. It says, in some organizations, project managers report into PMO. Do you see that as a conflict, as first line project managers are part of the same group?
So they report into a PMO in terms, right? So
this is just to get. I think just to give a little bit more context around that, because we've Lindsay and I have been kind of looking at this a bit already. So the American model, very much, and some European models say PMO manager is essentially the delivery manager. So they have all of the project managers reporting into them, plus they have the PMO. So it's an interesting one in terms of, can they be seen as kind of totally independent if they're part of the delivery manager?
No, they absolutely couldn't. I mean, as I've said, PMOs, wherever they are never totally independent, because they're always reporting up into management somewhere. So they're never going to be completely independent. And the closer they are to the delivery of delivery decisions, the less independent they are. That model, I would say, that model where the PMO is responsible for the delivery of all the projects by providing the resources and things, that's not, there is no independence there really at all. Having said that, there must be an element, because there'll be a team of people who are presumably a part of this thing called a PMO. They are not day-to-day responsible for delivering anything other than the PMO activity. So there must be some level of independence.
But in terms of the level 1 and level 2 assurance, they can still do that, but obviously no chance of doing the level 3.
No, and that would be quite level 1 actually, because what the organisation is saying is that we will, one of the ways we will control risk on our projects is have them all reporting into one body. into a PMO who will make to them to do things in a particular way. So that's quite first line, I think, actually.
And I know it's interesting. In my history, I had exactly that kind of same conversation where I, as PMO manager, reported into the delivery manager, and actually we moved me for a couple of reasons. One was about a level of independence, but also it was about kind of from an ability to kind of be able to enforce things across the wider project organisation. And again, if I had my boss who could filter information that I was reporting, so to give me some independence on that, I actually kind of changed my reporting line. And it's interesting in some of the kind of what we're starting to see now is as PMOs become more prolific, organisations are finding it quite easy just to kind of say, well, we'll put that in with delivery as a single body, rather than kind of recognizing there's some value in being able to define more appropriate assurance by keeping that level of independence. And it goes back to kind of something you said at the beginning about how the development of PMOs is kind of moving on, and the maturity of the organizations in project delivery is to kind of where that sits. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that goes as organizations become more mature in delivering projects, but also in terms of their recognition of what assurance is and kind of how that should be applied in their organization. So we've got some more questions. They've warmed up now, Roy. So a couple of questions. And again, this is a one, because they're almost a bit like kind of health and safety is kind of wrapped together with that lovely ampersand in the middle.
Yes.
Assurance and governance.
Yes.
Is another one where kind of it's all said in one sentence, as it's almost all of the same thing. So what's the link between assurance and governance?
Right, I'm going to give you a shorter answer and a slightly longer answer. The shorter answer is they are not the same thing. And I often talk about assurance, risk, and governance as being three functions that interact with each other. And the reason, let's just take assurance and governance for a moment. So governance, if you're thinking in terms of governance, is making the decisions. It can only really make good decisions if it has confidence over the information it's making the decisions on. And that's where assurance comes in. So governance is dependent upon assurance to make good decisions.
Okay.
And to have an understanding as to whether risks are really being in the control or not. So
the governance is that structure that you're providing confidence into.
That's right. Yes, indeed. However, governance itself is made up by processes, people, and systems in organizations. They themselves have risks associated with them. People may not turn up for meetings. The terms of reference may be rubbish. There may not be, there could be lots of reasons why governance doesn't work very well. So assurance also has a role to play to be confident, provide confidence to the organization that the governance arrangements are working properly as well. Okay. So it's a symbiotic relationship, I think is the best way of describing it. So you can't, for many people, they say, oh, assurance is just part of governance. And I say it can't be, because assurance has to itself review and have a view on whether the governance is working. If, however, then the other answer, and there's a guy called Robert Buttrick who I know you know very well, who I have an argument with about this, because he has a very different view. He talks about governance from the point of view of everything that's in place to run a business or run an organization. So it's a concept more than just an arrangement. So yes, from a concept point of view, assurance is an essential element of an organization trying to do an endeavor. So therefore, it has to be a part of the overall governance of that organization to have an assurance capability. So I think that's why people get confused between the two.
You see, and I have to say, kind of with that, I'm definitely aligned with you as opposed to, our good friend Robert, and I do Mr. Buttrick a lot. I think the interesting thing is kind of how I would see. I think you can have governance without assurance, but you can't have assurance without governance.
Well, you can have assurance without governance, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's of no value because it doesn't feed anywhere. Nobody does anything about it. No, you're right.
So another question we've got is there any difference when you're doing assurance of a project that is being delivered by a third party? Or, you know, if you've got a mix, some of it's been done in-house, but a majority has been done by a third party.
It's certainly more complex, and it's well. There's a couple of ways of looking at it. It very much depends on your relationship, what the relationship is to that third party, whether it's a contract or just a sort of a partnership or whatever it is. And now the terms that define the relationship between the body and the third party will determine to a large extent how assurance can work between the two. And again, it's almost impossible to say this is the answer because it very much depends on it. There's something like say behaviours and culture to me again in a minute because I think that's a really important point to bring into this. I've lost my train of thought now. So this is if there's a third party. The other thing is you should try, and I've done this with some success. What you can do is you can try and bring together the communities who are interested in assurance on that endeavour. So a well-known example for those people who were involved was when Crossrail was in its early days. I set up something called the Crossrail Integrated Assurance Group, and we had there. The Crossrail, something like Crossrail has third party in space. It has third, fourth, fifth, seventh, ninth, 100th parties, and loads and loads of parties. And I brought senior assurance people together from each of the main parties involved in delivering Crossrail for a sort of Chatham House rules, cards on the table, just regular discussion around what's happening on this project. And that worked really well. But that then does take me on to the culture and behaviours point, which I think is a really important one. You can have the best governance, best assurance arrangements in the world, but if you don't have the right culture and behaviours around it, it will fail. So Crossrail is actually quite a good example of that. It had really good assurance arrangements put in place, but it got to a point where people were ignoring it. They were watering it down because they didn't like it very much. They didn't need it anymore. So they bent the rules and they weren't honest about some of the things the assurance was telling them. And of course, in sort of situation with a third party on a partnership or a joint venture, it all very much depends on the culture and the nature and the behaviour of people within that. How willing are they to share bad news? How willing are they to share risk and understanding what's actually happening on risk?
Interesting, and certainly one of the things that we always kind of come back to, almost with kind of any subject around the PMO, is behaviours are actually key to as to whether things are actually going to be a success or not. So I've got one more question to give to you, Roy, which is an individual who is carrying out the role of assurance, and they are a single individual. They're not part of a PMO. So where do they start? And after coming on the course, of course. Of course.
There is not. I have to say, there's not a lot out there. There's not huge. There aren't. If we want to know how to manage a project or plan a project, there's loads of stuff out there. There isn't at the moment. There's a lot more than there was when I started the SIG back in 2008. But one of the places you can go is to the APM and the guidance around assurance. So there's 4 things that the APM Assurance SIG has published over the years. They're all really useful in terms of giving insights into what assurance is all about and how to do it. There's people will always think that I've got taking some royalties for this, but there's a particular book that was written by someone.
You can send the link afterwards, Roy.
I can send the link. A particular book on how to do project reviews. It was written actually a number of years ago, but it's actually a really good book. So I would recommend reading that to anybody who wants to know more about it. And if you're in an assurance role, then throw your hat in with the Assurance SIG, APM Assurance SIG. You don't have to be an APM member. It's always better if you are, of course, but you don't have to be an APM member to be involved in the APM Assurance SIG. And if you want to know more about that, then just let me know. Be in contact.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Roy. So I think we have got another question that's come in. Some of the discussions seem to assume you're in a large organisation with large PMOs. Is it suitable for somebody in quite a small organisation with perhaps a PMO of perhaps only one or two people?
You're unlikely to have it as a full-time role for anybody, absolutely. But there is probably just thinking on the fly a little bit. One thought is maybe the emphasis for the PMO there is to try and work with the organisation to improve assurance arrangements overall, as opposed to trying to battle away this thing and do it all from within the PMO. So maybe there's a sort of more of a slant on the advisory side and support to the organisation to get better at it, rather than just trying to do more and more assurance within the PMO. The other thing is actually the amount of assurance that's needed. Okay, it's obviously going to depend on the size of the organisation, but actually the way you should look at it is what is the size of the risk and the risk appetite of the organisation. It could be a really small organisation, but doing really risky things, in which case it needs a lot more assurance than maybe a bigger organisation that's doing lots of stuff that's always done for decades and always got it right. That doesn't need that much assurance. So we always try and bring it back to the risk and tie it back to the risk. What are the risks and what are the organisation needs in place to give confidence that risks are being managed?
So even if you work in a small organisation, coming on the course is still going to provide you with kind of the information and some useful practical steps that you can take in your organisation. Absolutely,
because it's about ways of working. It's about principles, all that sort of stuff. Absolutely, yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. I think we've kind of covered off all of the questions that have been asked. Just as a quick reminder, the course that Roy will be delivering is going to be on the 7th and 8th of December. It's the 2-day kind of public I'm going to say public sector. It's not a public sector. It's an open course. It's a public course. So we're going to be delivering that virtually. We'll be using Zoom. Roy will cover off all of those 2 days. If you want any information, you can go to www.pmolearning.co.uk. If you look into the specialist courses, the assurance course will be there. If you've got any problems, give us a ring and we'll be more than happy to talk through that. So thanks very much for your time, Roy. I think we've all kind of learned something from this afternoon, and hopefully if you've got anybody's interested, you can book online, or as I say, get in touch and we can take you through the booking process.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Eileen.
Thanks a lot, Roy. Bye-bye.
Bye then. Bye.